What's up? What's happening? Welcome in on a Thursday edition of the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Always live as well on the free Odyssey app and streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980 with the fist-pumping Anthony Haney, super producer of the show. I'm Craig Hoffman, merely the host who has his name on it. We're going to start today with a question, and hopefully that it helps provide some context to the way that we've started the show the past couple of days. I don't want to just rehash the same points. I don't want to talk Commanders, sacks, offensive line. Like, there is some new news on the offensive line, as they would say on New Heights, Anthony. New news. Do you actually listen to the Kelsey Brothers podcast or just the clips?
Just the clips.
You're not a big podcast guy, I gather.
I don't have a lot of time to, sit down.
What do you listen to when you drive in every day?
Like to work?
Yeah. Music?
Yeah, music.
You're a music guy?
Yeah.
See, I'm a podcast on the commute guy.
The thing is, so Zaire, he has a podcast. I haven't finished the last pod.
Does he know that?
I don't know. Maybe. I told him I was halfway through because it was a long pod. It was an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And I was like 55 or like 57 minutes through. So.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's tough. When I started doing the show, my podcast game got like re-upped because I finally had a commute again. But I used to also listen to podcasts. I'm a podcast nerd. I used to listen to them like walking around the house, or like even like if Rachel has a call, I'll put a podcast on and just listen. And like sometimes I'll listen to them when I play Madden or whatever. Anyway, the point is none of that matters. We have new news on the offensive line. It looks like Tyler Larson's going to get the start based off of practice reps today. I'm guessing Chris Paul is going to start at left guard. We don't know that for sure yet. We'll see if it's him or Ricky Stromberg or they move Gates over. But my guess is that it's going to be Chris Paul. And the only reason that Chris Paul hasn't been going in when Sadiq has gotten hurt previously is because he's been inactive. Stromberg has the position flex, so he's been active for these games. But you're going to get Tyler Larson, and we'll talk about that stuff, or what that means for this offense a little later in the show. But the big thing that I think is interesting is trying to put some of the Commanders' offensive struggles into context around the rest of the NFL. And this idea comes after, like, it was funny. So we record Take Command this morning, our preview podcast that'll be out tomorrow morning. And there was a couple things that we talked about in terms of play selection. We spent like the first 20 minutes talking about basically, does EB need to run the football more? And we talked about some like bigger things that running the football accomplishes and why, even though analytically it may not make sense to ever run the football, you actually have to do it because of reasons X, Y, Z. And we even talked about how, as we got into the podcast and talked about how, like, if I was the Eagles defensive coordinator, what would I do? And I told Logan, like, I would use a bunch of too high structures. I would beg the Commanders to run the football and prove to me that they can do it. But I'm not gonna let Terry and Jahan or Curtis or any of these guys get loose in big plays. I'm going to make sure that I'm covered in the back end. And if that means taking a player out of the box, then so be it. Because the Commanders haven't proved to me that they can run it, and more importantly, they don't want to run it. So I'm gonna take that kind of Belichickian strategy, especially considering the Eagles, who normally are a single high safety type team. They're a pretty cover three match type of team under Sean Desai, their defensive coordinator, who comes from like the Vic Fangio school. They played a bunch of cover 2 last week because they played Miami, and everyone plays cover 2 against Miami because Tyreek's a monster to deal with, and you need a safety on his side at all times. The only way to do that is to make sure you have a safety on both sides at all times. And so, considering you've already been practicing it for a week, I would just take the same strategy and be like, look, we're not doing this because of Tyreek, but we're doing this because the weakness is running the football, and they're bad at it. And especially with as good as the Eagles' D-line is, kind of what the Commanders can do and what they have been doing. The Commanders have had more success playing too high structures this year when they finally figured it out, because it's like, oh, well, this limits our exposure on the back end, and our D-line is good enough to play the run on its own. So I say all that stuff, and we say all that stuff. Logan and I talk about it. And then Logan, like half an hour later, sends me the Ringer NFL podcast, hosted by my old friend Nora Princiati and Steven Ruiz. And they literally talk about the same exact things, but not about the Commanders necessarily, but that these are trends. Some of these issues that are cropping up for Washington are league-wide issues as teams have leaned in to the analytics, possibly without fully understanding the data. And to be clear, because I feel like people also get like there are certain people that love analytics, there are certain people that hate analytics. Most people don't actually understand what analytics are. All analytics are is data. It's stats, but fancier. You'd maybe take multiple stats. Some teams have like formulas for certain things, and you can take, this, that, and that thing and come up with a rating. Well, shoot, we've had quarterback rating forever. ESPN redid it 20 years ago with QBR. So like these types of things have existed. It's just how you use them. Everyone's got the same data, but how does that data then project forward? And also, I think the other big factor here is what actually influences the data. Why does the data say the thing that it said? Anthony, this is where I think it's super interesting to like look at the Commanders and what EB's doing in a larger context. So, basic analytics math, right? Hey, we want to get the most yards we can on every single play, right? That makes sense? So, if we take 3 run plays and 3 pass plays, and let's say the pass plays are a 5-yard completion, a 10-yard completion, and an incompletion. So that's 15 yards total divided by 3 plays. That's 5 yards per play. That's math even I can do. Well, if you got 5 yards per play running the ball, that's amazing. We love that. And that's no explosive pass plays. We didn't even get 15. We got 10 and 5. We got like a quick hitch, and we got a basic over the middle. Sweet. We got 15 yards in 3 plays. We'll take that. It's 5 yards a play. You got to average then 5 yards per carry to get that running the football. So theoretically, passing the ball is more efficient. That is why everyone says that. And again, like you have a more chance of explosive plays, and you also have a higher chance of penalties in the run game, which pulls that average down. You stick a -10 in there, you could have a 10-yard run, which is a great run. The next play, you get a holding penalty, that's a -10, and then your next one's a 4-yard carry. You've had a 10-yard carry, a 4-yard carry, and you're still only averaging 4 yards per play. Right? So what I think is tough, though, is that math requires the defense to essentially cooperate, right? If the defense knows that you are going to throw the ball, it changes. All that math changes. If you were to tell the defense, hey, we're throwing it, your yards per play average is going to come down because they're going to say, we don't have to care about the run. We can blitz from weird angles because we're not worried about run fits. We can play junk coverages on the back end because we can put guys in weird spots because we're not concerned about having someone out of a gap and letting up an explosive run, or even giving up that very simple 5 yards per carry. And so what has happened across the league in the eyes of Steven Ruiz and Nora Princiati, Steven wrote a piece for The Ringer, and then they talked about it on the show, is that because some teams have become fairly predictable on first and second down, you are seeing less production in the passing game. And the other big one is you're seeing more sacks. Because all of a sudden, these mixed coverages that cause confusion for quarterbacks and often can be paired with unique blitzes or simulated pressures, zone blitzes, things like that, that you would never do if you thought the other team was going to run the football because you're begging to have a big play hit on you in the run game, come in way more frequency on first and second down. And so sacks are up across the league. Offensive production is down across the league. And a fairly reasonable hypothesis as to why is because teams are not running the football as much. Which sounds crazy, but it also comes with the fact that this is math that has been the case since like 2018. 2018 was the year that offense peaked in the NFL, and defensive coordinators have started to adjust. And it's like, fine, you want to put little guys on the field, we're going to draft lighter, faster players, and we're going to get more DBs on the field because we're not scared of you running it. And I think when you look at a team like Washington, they've taken that to an extreme. The extreme, I'll explain to you next. And we'll get into some of the changes that the Commanders are making on the offensive line this week. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. So we're talking about why offenses are down across the NFL. And I have a hypothesis that, and this is one that I put out this morning as part of Take Command, Logan and I have talked about this in the past, that, the analytics that suggest passing the ball is more efficient are true, but they're also relying on the fact that teams are scared that you're going to run the ball. And to even back that up a little bit further, like, why would you, if you're a defense, be scared of the thing that's less dangerous? Well, because it's easier, right? You don't have to make a decision. There's no risk of an interception. Of course, you're always at risk of fumble. And as we talked about, penalties are more frequent on run plays than pass plays, but they can also happen on pass plays. Obviously, holding happens all the time. There's less variance in the run game. Just hand the ball off, and if you give up 5 yards on that, you're going to lose. Like, you give up on average 5 yards a carry and let a team do that for 30 carries in a game, like, you're dead. So teams don't want to give you the easy thing. And because of that, they play defense a certain way that exposes them a little bit more in the pass game. And as a result, passing is a more efficient way. But if you take away that threat of running the football, then teams can make your quarterback's life and your offensive line's life and your receiver's life significantly harder. And that brings us to the Washington Commanders. Eric Bieniemy is dropping Sam Howell back more than any quarterback in the league. That's crazy. That makes no sense. Because, one, a young quarterback you should be trying to limit his role so that he can do the things that you ask him to do well, and some of the variance that's innately going to be a part of his game because he's young and inexperienced is less dramatically impacting the game down in and down out. So that's thing one. Thing two, when you have, say, an average offensive line that gives up some pressures and you have a quarterback who is notorious for holding the ball too long and hasn't really figured out how to move well in the pocket and tends to run into some sacks, then you take average offensive line production, right? If you have to get, let's say you have to make 50 free throws, would you rather have 50 attempts or 100 attempts? You'd rather have 100 attempts, because if you shoot 50%, then you've made it. Cool, 50% on 100, we got our 50. If you have to hit 50 and you only shoot 50, you got to make 100% of them. And so the opportunity number is why, for instance, as I mentioned yesterday, Andrew Wiley is giving up 20% or pressure on 20% of plays, which isn't good, but is 17th in the league per PFF. And again, like, some people really get mad at PFF. All they do is watch film and attach numbers to what they see. So it's not like they're, putting somehow the film in a computer and then it spits it out on its own. It's like, no, you have a human being, Nick Ackridge, who's been on the station before, I believe is the person who does the evaluations for the Commanders. And then he gets double checked by some other folks at PFF. It's like, oh, pressure by Wiley, mark it down. You go to the next play, pressure by Wiley, mark it down. And you go through, and then at the end it spits out a percentage, and then they can database it all, and then people who pay for it, like I do, can look at the numbers and be like, oh, Andrew Wiley is giving up pressure on 21% of snaps. That's 17th for right tackles in the NFL. So he's an average right tackle. 17th puts you right smack dab in the middle. But Andrew Wiley has given up more pressures than anyone in the NFL, because that 21% multiplied by the times that Sam Howell has had to drop back this year is more pressures than every other right tackle in the league. So you're doing, like, schematically, play calling wise, you're doing that to Andrew Wiley. He's not performing worse than anyone expected. It's just he's having to do a lot more. And by the way, those pressures are turning into sacks more often because the guy he's protecting for is bad at keeping pressures from not being sacks. And the guy he protected for last year in Kansas City is the literal best in the league. So, with those things said, why is that happening? Why is this Eric Bieniemy offense so susceptible to giving up kind of average pressure. One, they have average personnel, but two, and this became even more problematic against a team that likes to blitz like the Giants. And if you don't think other teams are going to do this more often, you're crazy. There's no threat of the run because they are dropping him back, again, more than everyone else. And so teams are not scared and thus are playing more difficult coverages to decipher, both for Sam and the receivers, as well as some different blitz looks, some different pressure packages that are harder for the O-line. And while a lot of the stuff that EB is running could work, it doesn't have the time or the success rate because it's going against harder things to match up against. And the personnel that he's got is largely inexperienced in dealing with the kinds of problems that defenses are presenting. So, man, it is, in that way, some of the solution is simple. Just run the football more. But when I talked about it being an extreme, I'm not just talking about the play calling. Like, their run game is basic as hell. And this is the other thing that I think is, like, where I really struggle with this offense is if they just added some spice to this run game and the threat of it was better. Stephen Ruiz from the Ringer had a really good line on the podcast that I've referenced here, that it's not really about establishing the run. It's about establishing the threat of the run. You could still throw it 68, 69, 70% of the time if when you ran it, it was effective. But when you run nothing but really like gun runs and you're averaging, with your running backs less than 4 yards a carry and your main running back in Brian Robinson is averaging like 2.8 or whatever it is the last couple of games, why would you dedicate resources to that as a defensive coordinator? You're just going to make sure that you don't give up big pass plays. And so the lack of creativity, the lack of detail, the lack of execution in the run game is really the root, in a lot of ways, of their problems. Those things are enhanced by the fact that your quarterback is limited. And I know that makes people angry, but like, the reality is EB's not running some of the stuff that he ran in Kansas City because it's pretty clear that Sam and some others on this offense, let's not put it all on Sam. Not that I'm ever really trying to put it all on Sam, even though that's what people think I do. At least this week. It's a very weird phenomenon. Anyway, keeping it moving, being very clear so that we can skip those comments. But primarily the quarterback isn't ready to call that stuff. Like they messed with orbit motion. They messed with jet sweeps, all that stuff in training camp. And they haven't called much of it. And so until you get, and I think they thought the RPO game would be better for them, and that was kind of going to be their solution to some of this stuff. But they have not had a lot of success with the RPO game. So they've abandoned it on some level. And so when you have gun runs, for instance, if your running back is to the right of you, you really only have to make sure that the team doesn't run left, because you don't run right out of shotgun when your back is offset to the right. So could you use Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson, or substitute Chris Rodriguez for one of them, or Curtis Samuel, and a two-back set and keep the threat alive of a two-way run play? Like, that little bit of spice could help. And they've done that at certain times this year. And I think some of Curtis's carries have come in those situations. And he's gotten some decent yardage. So there's little things like that, adding, receivers to the blocking structure and like nerdy stuff that Logan's great at talking about. And his experience with, obviously with Kyle and with LaFleur and McDaniel and the guys that do this stuff in the league really well. If they could do that, it would help everybody out. So it's not that they need to dramatically overhaul the offense and that they need to do so much more running the football. They need to run it a little bit more, I think, for sure. But when they run it, they need to spend more time detailing it up and running it effectively. And we're going to find out real quick whether that's something they can do, or if this line is, and this scheme is kind of, I don't know, fatally flawed, but certainly flawed for what this, I think, could maximize this group of personnel. Speaking of the personnel, I do think Tyler Larsen being in there will help. Nick Gates has not been, like, Nick Gates has been kind of fine, like, not great to okay most of the season until Sunday when he was really, really bad. He's started 51 career games. About half of those have been at guard. Tyler Larsen has 93 career starts, and every single one of them is at center. Like, he is a bigger body. He is more experienced. And I think part of this, and I know we're going to talk about this on Sunday on the Take Command pregame show, because Logan and I were texting about it earlier today, like, the way a veteran center can target pass protection, can identify the Mike linebacker, can target your runs. Even those little things being done better will help. And then I think Chris Paul is going to wind up playing left guard. I think the play strength he has, the consistency that he showed in the preseason, if he can do that, then I think we're in good shape, because Sadiq has been a little bit more up and down, although he certainly has been, I would think, pretty good most of the year, Sunday notwithstanding.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.